The day I married Jacob Evans, I made sure Andrew could see every moment of it. I wanted him to witness how radiant I looked walking down the aisle in my custom Vera Wang dress. I wanted him to see the tears in Jacob's eyes as I approached, the unwavering devotion on his handsome face. I wanted Andrew to hear our personalized vows that spoke of second chances and finding love when you least expect it. Most of all, I wanted him to watch as his worst enemy slid that platinum band onto my finger, sealing a union that would haunt Andrew for the rest of his life. When I sent that wedding invitation to Andrew, I knew exactly what I was doing. A small part of me, the part that still remembered his cruel words, hoped it would destroy him the way he once destroyed me. "You'll never find love again, Sarah," he had told me, his voice dripping with contempt as he packed his bags. "No one will ever want you the way I did. And no one will ever make you feel the way I made you feel." Looking back now, I realize those words were both his greatest weapon and his greatest mistake. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up marrying my ex-fiancé's sworn enemy, you need to know the whole story. And trust me, it's not what you think. I met Andrew Caldwell 5 years ago at a publishing house party in Manhattan. I was 26, freshly promoted to junior editor, and high on the validation that came with finally being recognized for my work. The party was at some rooftop bar with overpriced cocktails and a skyline view that justified the exorbitant drink prices. I was wearing a black dress that I'd splurged on after my promotion. Nothing extraordinary, but it made me feel confident, capable. I first noticed Andrew across the room, tall and commanding in conversation with the head of our fiction department. There was something magnetic about him, the way he gestured when he spoke, how people leaned in to catch his words. His laugh carried across the room, rich and genuine. When his eyes caught mine, I felt that peculiar drop in my stomach, like missing a step on a staircase. "Sarah Miller, right?" he said later, appearing beside me at the bar, the editor who salvaged the Bennett manuscript. I blushed, surprised he knew about that. The Bennett manuscript had been a mess when it landed on my desk, a thriller with a compelling premise but structural issues that made it nearly unreadable. I'd spent weeks working with the author, restructuring and refining until it actually worked. It was the project that had earned me my promotion. "I didn't realize anyone noticed," I said, taking a sip of my wine to hide my surprise. "I noticed promising talent," he replied with a smile that seemed both professional and something more. "I'm Andrew Caldwell. I run the literary fiction division at Beacon Press." My heart fluttered. Beacon Press was one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the city. Even in our competitive industry, Andrew had a reputation as a brilliant editor with an almost supernatural ability to spot bestsellers. "Of course I know who you are," I said. "Your list is incredible. The Martinson novel last year was extraordinary." His eyes lit up, and we launched into a conversation about books that lasted well past midnight. By the time we exchanged numbers, I was already halfway in love with his mind. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in the village. He ordered for both of us in fluent Italian, which should have been pretentious but somehow wasn't. We talked about our favorite authors, arguing good-naturedly about Franzen and debating the merits of autofiction. When he walked me home, he kissed me on my doorstep like we were in an old movie. "I've never met anyone who understands books the way you do," he whispered against my lips. 3 months later, we moved in together. 6 months after that, he proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires, presenting me with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "You're my person, Sarah," he said as I cried and nodded. "You're my home." For 2 years, I believed we were perfect. We built a life centered around our shared passion for literature. Our apartment in Brooklyn became a haven of overstuffed bookshelves, and Sunday mornings spent reading in bed. We hosted dinner parties for authors and editors, establishing ourselves as a power couple in publishing circles. Andrew's career soared. He acquired 3 bestsellers in 1 year and was featured in a publisher's weekly profile. My career advanced too, though more slowly. Andrew always said that was the natural order of things since he had 5 years head start in the industry. The first crack appeared so subtly I almost missed it. I had been working with a debut novelist, a young woman named Eliza, whose manuscript had been rejected by 12 other editors before landing on my desk. The story, a complex family drama set in rural Pennsylvania, spoke to me immediately. I championed it through acquisitions, fought for a decent advance, and spent countless hours helping Eliza refine her already beautiful prose. When advance copies arrived, I brought one home to show Andrew, bursting with pride. He took the book, flipped through a few pages with a distracted air, and set it on the coffee table. "Looks interesting, babe," he said, returning to his laptop. "Though the market for family dramas is pretty saturated right now. But this one's different," I insisted, picking the book back up. "The way she writes about intergenerational trauma is revolutionary, and her dialogue is some of the best I've ever read." Andrew glanced up, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "You always were a sucker for underdogs. Just don't be disappointed if it doesn't perform. First novels rarely do." I felt a small sting but brushed it off. Andrew was just being realistic, I told myself. That was part of his success, his clear-eyed pragmatism about the industry. But 2 months later, when Eliza's novel received a glowing review in the New York Times and began climbing the bestseller lists, Andrew's reaction was strange. He acknowledged it with a tight smile and quick, "Congratulations," then immediately changed the subject to his own new acquisition. Looking back, I should have seen it then, the way his support dimmed whenever my light started to shine too brightly. But I was still viewing our relationship through rose-colored glasses, interpreting his behavior as momentary distraction rather than a fundamental character flaw. The real unraveling began last spring. I had been approached by a prestigious literary agency about representing a memoir they were particularly excited about. The author was a well-known journalist who had spent a year embedded with climate refugees. The manuscript was powerful, timely, and precisely the kind of socially conscious narrative our imprint valued. Landing it would be a significant coup. The agent invited me to lunch to discuss terms, and I spent the entire morning preparing, researching comparable titles and sales figures to strengthen my position. I was nervous but exhilarated. This could be a career-defining acquisition. When I told Andrew about the meeting over breakfast, I expected enthusiasm, maybe even advice. Instead, he looked skeptical. "Patricia Huang is sending it to you directly, not to Marcus?" "Marcus was my boss, the executive editor." "Yes," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness from my voice. "She specifically asked for me. Apparently she liked my work on the Eliza Chen novel." Andrew took a slow sip of his coffee. "Interesting strategy on Patricia's part." "What do you mean?" "Well, sending a high-profile project to a junior editor instead of going straight to the top. She's probably using you as leverage to get Marcus's attention." I felt my cheeks flush. "Or maybe she genuinely thinks I'm the right editor for the project." Andrew reached across the table and patted my hand in a gesture that suddenly felt patronizing. "Of course, babe. I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up too high. Patricia plays chess, not checkers." I withdrew my hand, the excitement of the morning dimming. "I should get going. Don't want to be late." As I gathered my things, Andrew called after me, "Remember to ask about international rights up front. And don't let her lowball you on the marketing commitment." I nodded stiffly, though part of me wanted to remind him that I'd been in publishing for 5 years and knew how to negotiate. The unsolicited advice felt less like support and more like he was assuming my incompetence. The lunch with Patricia went brilliantly. We connected immediately over our shared vision for the memoir, and by dessert, she had all but confirmed that we were her first choice. I floated back to the office, already mentally drafting my pitch to the acquisitions committee. When I came home that evening, I couldn't wait to tell Andrew. I found him in our kitchen, preparing dinner, a rare occurrence that immediately put me on alert. "What's the occasion?" I asked, setting down my bag. Andrew turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand, and gave me a brilliant smile. "Celebrating," he said. "I acquired the new James Linden novel today. 3-book deal, mid-6 figures. Beacon officially outbid Knopf this afternoon." My heart sank a little, not because I wasn't happy for him, but because I realized my news would now seem secondary. James Linden was a literary darling whose last novel had won the National Book Award. This was indeed a massive acquisition. "That's amazing, Andrew," I said, genuinely impressed despite my disappointment. "Congratulations. The best part," he continued, stirring whatever was in the pot, "is that James specifically requested me as his editor. Said he wouldn't sign with Beacon otherwise." "Wow," I managed. "That's quite a vote of confidence, right?" Andrew's face was flushed with triumph. "Marcus is already talking about a promotion to executive editor, youngest in Beacon's history." I forced a smile and reached for wine glasses. "We should definitely celebrate then." Throughout dinner, Andrew talked animatedly about his plans for Linden's new novel, the marketing strategy, the potential for film rights. I nodded and asked appropriate questions, waiting for him to eventually ask about my day. He never did. Finally, as we were clearing the plates, I said, "So I had that lunch with Patricia Huang today." "Oh, right. Andrew said, loading the dishwasher. How did that go? Did she try to use you to get to Marcus? The casual dismissal in his tone made something snap inside me. Actually, no. She offered me the memoir. Exclusively. We're presenting to the acquisitions committee next week. Andrew straightened up, surprise flickering across his face. Really? That's unexpected. Is it? I challenged, suddenly tired of downplaying my accomplishments. Is it so hard to believe that an agent might want to work with me based on my own merits? That's not what I meant, he backpedaled. It's just that Patricia usually works with more established editors. It's a compliment that she's trusting you with something this significant. His words were right, but his tone still carried a note of condescension that set my teeth on edge. I am established, I said quietly. I've been in this industry for 5 years. I've edited bestsellers. I've discovered new voices. Just because I don't have your title or your network doesn't mean I'm not good at what I do. Andrew looked genuinely perplexed. Sarah, you know I think you're talented. I've always said that. No, I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. You've always treated my career like it's a cute hobby compared to yours. You've always acted like my successes are lucky breaks while yours are inevitable due to your superior skill. That's not fair, he protested, but I could see in his eyes that some part of him recognized the truth in my words. Isn't it? I pressed. When Eliza's book took off, you could barely acknowledge it. You changed the subject to your own projects within 30 seconds. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now seemed like calculated dishevelment. You're overreacting. I've been nothing but supportive of your career. Supportive? I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised us both. Andrew, you actively undermine my confidence before every big meeting. You frame your criticism as realistic advice, but it always leaves me feeling smaller. We stared at each other across the kitchen, the distance between us suddenly feeling vast and unbridgeable. I realized with startling clarity that this pattern had existed throughout our relationship. His subtle dismissals, his backhanded compliments, his need to position himself as the expert even in areas where I had equal knowledge. I think I need some air, I said finally, grabbing my jacket. Sarah, come on, Andrew called after me. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I paused at the door. Am I? Or am I finally seeing things in the right proportion for the first time? I walked for hours that night, circling our Brooklyn neighborhood as I replayed countless interactions through this new lens. The way Andrew always spoke over me at industry events, how he would explain concepts to me that I already understood, his habit of taking credit for ideas we had developed together, the subtle ways he positioned himself as the mentor in our relationship, despite our relatively equal footing in the industry. By the time I returned home, the apartment was dark except for the glow of Andrew's laptop in our bedroom. He looked up when I entered, his face carefully arranged into an expression of patient concern. Feeling better? He asked. I wasn't, but I was too emotionally exhausted to continue the fight. I'm tired, I said instead. Can we talk tomorrow? He nodded, closing his laptop. For what it's worth, I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel less than. It's never been my intention. I wanted to believe him. Part of me still did. But as I lay beside him that night, a hairline fracture had formed in the foundation of our relationship, and I wasn't sure if it could be repaired. The next few weeks were strained. We circled each other cautiously, overly polite, avoiding anything that might reignite our argument. On the surface, we returned to normal, dinners together, weekend brunches, falling asleep in the same bed. But something essential had shifted. Meanwhile, I threw myself into preparing for the acquisition of the climate refugee memoir. The committee approved my proposal, and we made an offer that the agent accepted. I was assigned as the primary editor, with Marcus providing oversight but giving me significant autonomy. It was exactly the opportunity I had been working toward. Andrew congratulated me with flowers and dinner at an expensive restaurant. His words were perfect, his smile bright, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his support was performative, a calculated response to our argument rather than genuine enthusiasm for my success. Then came the industry gala that would change everything. The annual Publishing Excellence Awards was the biggest night in New York publishing, a black-tie affair at the New York Public Library, where the industry's elite gathered to honor the year's best books and brightest talents. Andrew had been nominated for Editor of the Year, a prestigious recognition that virtually guaranteed his promotion at Beacon. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald gown that complemented my red hair and made me feel beautiful and confident. As we prepared that evening, I found myself genuinely excited for Andrew, despite our recent tension. This nomination was the culmination of years of hard work, and I was proud to stand beside him as he received this recognition. "You look stunning," he said as I emerged from the bathroom, his eyes warming appreciatively. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a flutter of the old connection between us. "And you look very handsome." "Editor of the Year material for sure," he grinned, adjusting his bow tie. "From your lips to the committee's ears." The library was transformed for the gala, with twinkling lights and floral arrangements turning the historic reading room into a magical space. We moved through the crowd, stopping frequently as colleagues congratulated Andrew on his nomination. I stood beside him, smiling and adding appropriate comments, playing the role of the supportive partner. At the bar, I ran into Eliza Chen, my author whose debut had performed so well. "Sarah!" she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "I was hoping to see you tonight. I have news." "Good news, I hope?" I asked, genuinely happy to see her thriving. "The best," she beamed. "The book's been optioned for a limited series. HBO. Can you believe it?" "Eliza, that's incredible." I squeezed her hands, thrilled for her success. "You deserve every bit of this. It wouldn't have happened without you," she said earnestly. "You were the only editor who saw the potential. Everyone's talking about your eye for talent, you know." I blushed, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "The talent was all yours. I just helped shape it a little." "Don't diminish your role," she insisted. "My agent says you're becoming known as the editor who can spot a diamond in the rough. The Patricia Huang acquisition is just further proof." Pride bloomed in my chest, not the self-conscious, hesitant pride I usually felt, but something stronger and more certain. For perhaps the first time, I was allowing myself to fully own my accomplishments. Andrew appeared at my side, sliding an arm around my waist. "Eliza," he greeted her with professional warmth. "Congratulations on all your success. Sarah certainly found a winner with your book." "Andrew." Eliza nodded, her smile cooling slightly. "Yes, I was just telling Sarah how grateful I am for her vision. Not many editors would have taken a chance on a manuscript that had been rejected 12 times. Sarah's always had a soft spot for underdogs," Andrew replied with an indulgent smile that made my skin crawl. "It's one of her most charming qualities." I stiffened beside him. There it was again, the subtle undermining, framing my professional judgment as an emotional quirk rather than editorial acumen. Eliza's eyes flicked between us, sensing the tension. "Well, her soft spot resulted in a New York Times bestseller and now an HBO deal, so I'd say it's more than charming. It's brilliant business." Andrew's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around my waist. "Absolutely. We're all very proud of Sarah's growing reputation." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the damage was done. The evening that had started with such promise now felt tainted by Andrew's casual diminishment of my professional success. As we took our seats for dinner, I found myself seated next to Jacob Evans, the editorial director of Artemis Books, a smaller but highly respected independent publisher known for literary fiction and cutting-edge nonfiction. I knew Jacob peripherally from industry events. He was about Andrew's age, early 40s, with intelligent eyes and an understated confidence that contrasted sharply with Andrew's more flamboyant style. "Sarah Miller?" he said as I sat down, his smile reaching his eyes. "I've been hoping to meet you properly. Your work with Eliza Chen was remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, surprised and pleased that he was familiar with my editing. "I'm a big admirer of Artemis's List. Your commitment to diverse voices is something the whole industry should emulate." We fell into easy conversation about books, publishing trends, and the challenges of maintaining literary integrity in an increasingly commercial landscape. Jacob listened attentively to my opinions, asking thoughtful questions that indicated genuine interest rather than professional courtesy. "You know," he said after I'd shared my thoughts on the future of literary fiction, "we have an executive editor position opening up at Artemis next month. Jennifer Williams is moving to London to head our UK division." I blinked in surprise. Jennifer Williams was a legend in publishing circles. "Those will be big shoes to fill." "They will," Jacob agreed. "We're looking for someone with both commercial instincts and literary discernment. Someone who can spot talent others miss." He held my gaze meaningfully. "Someone like you, actually." My heart skipped. Is that an invitation to apply?" "It is," he confirmed. "More than that, it's an encouragement to apply. I've been watching your acquisitions, Sarah. You have a vision that aligns perfectly with where we want to take Artemis. Before I could respond, Andrew returned from networking at other tables and reclaimed his seat on my other side. I introduced the two men, watching with interest as they shook hands with what seemed like forced civility. "Evans," Andrew said, his tone cordial but cool. "Congratulations on the National Book Critics Circle win for the Patel novel." "Thank you, Caldwell," Jacob replied with equal formality. "And congratulations on your nomination tonight. Well deserved." An undercurrent of tension flowed between them that I couldn't quite decipher. I'd never heard Andrew mention Jacob before, but their interaction suggested a history beyond professional acquaintance. The awards ceremony began, momentarily distracting me from this peculiar dynamic. I applauded enthusiastically as various authors and publishers received recognition for their work. When Andrew's category was announced, I squeezed his hand supportively. The Editor of the Year award recognizes exceptional editorial vision, commitment to literary excellence, and significant contribution to the publishing landscape, the presenter announced. This year's winner has demonstrated all these qualities and more. The award goes to Jacob Evans of Artemis Books. Beside me, Andrew went completely still. I felt the shock ripple through him as Jacob rose to accept the award. The applause was enthusiastic. Jacob was well respected in the industry, known for elevating voices that might otherwise go unheard. I clapped along with everyone else, genuinely pleased for Jacob while simultaneously concerned about Andrew's reaction. When I glanced at him, his face was a mask of polite appreciation, but his eyes were hard, his jaw clenched tight. Jacob's acceptance speech was gracious and brief. He thanked his team at Artemis, acknowledged the authors who trusted him with their work, and emphasized the importance of independent publishing in an increasingly consolidated industry. As he returned to our table, carrying the Crystal Award, I offered sincere congratulations. "Well deserved," I told him. "The Patel novel was extraordinary." "Thank you, Sarah," he replied warmly. "Coming from an editor of your caliber, that means a great deal." Andrew maintained a rigidly pleasant demeanor throughout the remainder of the evening, but I could feel his disappointment and anger simmering beneath the surface. On the ride home, he was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the taxi window at the passing city lights. "I'm sorry about the award," I ventured finally. "You deserve to win." "Did I?" he asked flatly. "The industry clearly doesn't think so. Andrew, being nominated is still a tremendous honor. Everyone knows the incredible work you've done at Beacon." He gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone except the judges, apparently. And Jacob fucking Evans." The venom in his voice surprised me. "Do you two have some kind of history I don't know about?" Andrew was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "We were in the same graduate program at Columbia, competed for the same fellowship, the same internships. He's been trying to one-up me for 20 years. "I didn't realize," I said carefully. "Why would you?" Andrew replied dismissively. "It's ancient history. Except that he keeps finding ways to get what should be mine." The taxi pulled up to our building, ending the conversation but not the tension. In our apartment, Andrew poured himself a generous whiskey and loosened his tie with sharp, angry movements. "What did Evans want with you anyway?" he asked abruptly. "I saw you two deep in conversation before I came back to the table." I hesitated, uncertain whether this was the right moment to mention the job opportunity. Andrew was already upset, and this might feel like another blow. But concealing it seemed dishonest. "He mentioned that Jennifer Williams is moving to London," I said cautiously. "Artemis will be looking for a new executive editor." Andrew froze with his glass halfway to his lips. And he suggested I might apply for the position. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Andrew set his glass down with deliberate care. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "On the night I lose the Editor of the Year award to Jacob Evans, you tell me that he's trying to poach you for an executive position? A position higher than what you could hope to achieve at your current imprint for years?" "He wasn't poaching me," I protested. "He just suggested I apply." "It's a compliment, Andrew." "It's a tactic," he shot back. "Evans knows exactly what he's doing. He's using you to get at me." I stared at him, incredulous. "Using me? Did it occur to you that maybe he genuinely thinks I'm qualified for the job? That this has nothing to do with you?" "Don't be naive, Sarah," Andrew scoffed. "You're a good editor, but executive level at Artemis? That's a major step up from where you are now. Why would Evans offer that unless he had an ulterior motive?" His words sliced through me like a physical blow. The casual cruelty of "you're a good editor" coupled with his absolute certainty that I couldn't possibly deserve such a promotion on my own merits, was devastating. Maybe, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, because unlike you, Jacob Evans actually recognizes my abilities. Maybe he sees potential in me that you've been too self-absorbed to notice. Andrew's expression hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about. Evans is manipulating you, and you're falling for it because he stroked your ego. My ego? I repeated incredulously. That's rich coming from you. Your ego is so fragile that you can't even congratulate me on a job opportunity without making it about yourself. This isn't about my ego, Andrew insisted. It's about protecting you from being used as a pawn in Evans's games. Protecting me? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call constantly undermining my confidence and diminishing my achievements? Is that what you were doing tonight when you told Eliza that my success with her book was due to my soft spot for underdogs? Andrew had the grace to look slightly abashed. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, I countered. You've meant it like that from the beginning. You've never been able to fully celebrate my successes because they threaten your self-image as the superior talent in this relationship. That's not true, he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. It is true, I insisted, years of repressed frustration finally breaking free. You need me to be slightly less successful than you. You need me to look up to you, to defer to your greater wisdom and experience. The moment I start to shine in my own right, you find subtle ways to dim my light. You're being hysterical, Andrew said dismissively, reaching for his whiskey again. And there it is, I said quietly. The classic move, when a woman calls you on your behavior, label her emotional, hysterical, overreacting. We stared at each other across the living room, the gulf between us widening with every breath. In that moment, I saw Andrew clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the charismatic, brilliant man I'd fallen in love with, but someone whose insecurity ran so deep that he couldn't bear to see me succeed independently of him. I'm applying for the job at Artemis, I said finally, my voice calm and decided. Andrew's face darkened. If you do that, you're playing right into Evans's hands. No, I corrected him. I'm playing into my own hands. I'm making a decision based on what's best for my career, not what's most comfortable for your ego. This is a mistake, Sarah, he warned. Evans will use you and discard you once he's made his point. The only mistake, I replied, was not recognizing sooner how little you actually support me. How threatened you are by the possibility that I might be your equal, or God forbid, your superior in our field. Something shifted in Andrew's expression then, a hardening that chilled me. If you want to throw away everything we've built together for a job opportunity that's clearly being offered for all the wrong reasons, that's your choice, he said coldly. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. When have I ever come crying to you, Andrew? I asked quietly. When have you ever been a source of comfort rather than criticism? He had no answer for that. Instead, he drained his whiskey, set the glass down with a sharp click, and walked into our bedroom, closing the door firmly behind him. I stood in the living room, still in my emerald gown, feeling simultaneously drained and strangely liberated. The conversation had been painful, but it had also crystallized what I'd been feeling for months, that Andrew's love was conditional on my remaining slightly less successful than him, that his support extended only as far as his comfort zone allowed. I slept on the couch that night, wrapped in a throw blanket, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. By morning, I had decided to not only apply for the position at Artemis, but to seriously reconsider my relationship with Andrew. Something fundamental had broken between us, and I wasn't sure it could or should be repaired. The next few days were tense. Andrew and I moved around each other like cautious strangers, maintaining surface civility while avoiding any meaningful conversation. I sent my resume and cover letter to Jacob, who responded immediately with encouragement and an invitation to a formal interview the following week. I didn't tell Andrew about the interview. Some part of me still hoped that he might come around, that he might recognize his behavior and make a genuine effort to change. But as the days passed with no real reconciliation, that hope dimmed. The interview at Artemis was everything I could have wished for. Jacob and his team were engaged, enthusiastic about my vision, and genuinely interested in my ideas for their literary fiction list. The offices were smaller than Beacon's, but vibrant with creative energy. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, I was even more convinced that this was where I belonged. "You're exactly what we're looking for, Sarah," Jacob told me as he walked me to the elevator. "I'll be in touch very soon." I floated home, energized by the possibility of a fresh start in my career. When I entered our apartment, however, the atmosphere immediately dampened my spirits. Andrew was home early, sitting at the dining table with a strange expression on his face. "How was your interview?" he asked without preamble. I froze, momentarily disoriented by his knowledge. "How did you—" "Jennifer Williams called to congratulate me on your potential appointment," he cut in. "She assumed I knew, of course. Assumed I'd be proud of my fiancé being considered for such a prestigious position." Guilt and defiance warred within me. "I was going to tell you." "When?" he demanded. "After you accepted the offer? After you cleared out your desk at Bedford?" "I didn't tell you because I knew exactly how you'd react," I said, removing my coat and hanging it by the door with deliberate calm. "Exactly like this, making it about you being kept in the dark rather than about my opportunity. You deliberately excluded me from a major career decision," Andrew countered, "a decision that affects both of us. That says a lot about where this relationship stands, doesn't it?" He wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. My decision to keep the interview secret revealed the fundamental breakdown of trust between us. "Yes," I agreed quietly. "I suppose it does." Andrew's expression shifted, something like alarm replacing his anger. "What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what needed to be said. "It means I don't think this is working anymore, Andrew. Not just the career aspects of our relationship, but all of it. We've been growing in different directions for a long time now." "Because of one fight about a job offer?" he asked incredulously. "You're ready to throw away 2 years over that?" "It's not one fight," I corrected him gently. "It's a pattern that's been there all along. I just couldn't see it clearly until recently." "What pattern?" he demanded. "Being concerned about your career moves? Wanting to protect you from people who might take advantage of you?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "The pattern of needing to be superior. Of subtly undermining me whenever I start to succeed independently of you. Of framing your criticism as concern and your control as protection." Andrew stared at me, genuine bewilderment in his eyes. "That's not who I am, Sarah. That's not what I do." "It is," I insisted, feeling oddly calm now that the words were finally being spoken. "And the worst part is, I don't think you even realize you're doing it. It's so ingrained in how you relate to me that you can't see it." "So that's it?" he asked, his voice hardening. "You've made up your mind based on this warped perception of me, and there's no room for discussion?" I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the circular nature of our argument. "The fact that you're characterizing my feelings as a warped perception, rather than considering that they might be valid, says everything, Andrew. What do you want from me?" he demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "A full confession to crimes I don't believe I've committed? Self-flagellation for being proud of my accomplishments?" "No," I said softly. "I just wanted you to be as proud of my accomplishments as you are of your own. I wanted you to see me as your equal, not as someone who needs your guidance and protection. I wanted your love to be unconditional, not dependent on me remaining in your shadow." Andrew flinched as if I'd slapped him. For a moment, I thought I might have broken through, that he might actually hear what I was saying. But then his expression hardened again, pride overtaking vulnerability. "If that's how you see our relationship, then maybe you're right," he said coldly. "Maybe it is over." The finality of his words hung in the air between us. Despite having initiated this conversation, I felt a sharp pang of loss. Part of me had still hoped for reconciliation, for Andrew to fight for us, to acknowledge his behavior and commit to change. "I'll stay with my sister until I can find my own place," I said after a long silence. Andrew nodded stiffly. "That's probably best." I packed a suitcase that night with mechanical movements, my mind oddly blank as I selected clothes and toiletries for an indefinite stay away from home. Andrew disappeared into his office, the closed door a physical manifestation of the emotional barrier between us. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, he emerged looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept. For a brief moment, I thought he might ask me to stay, might finally acknowledge what had gone wrong between us. Instead, he watched silently as I gathered my things, speaking only when I was at the door. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," he said, his voice flat, "both with Evans and with us." I turned to look at him one last time, this man I had loved so deeply, now reduced to a bitter stranger. "No, Andrew. For the first time in a long time, I'm doing exactly what's right for me." His expression darkened, a flash of something ugly crossing his face. "You'll never find love again," he said, the words deliberate and cutting. "No one will ever want you the way I did, and no one will ever make you feel the way I made you feel. The venom in his voice shocked me, the naked cruelty a final confirmation that I was making the right choice. Without responding, I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door, closing it firmly behind me. As I stood in the hallway of the building we'd shared for 2 years, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, beneath the hurt and disappointment, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief at no longer having to make myself smaller to accommodate Andrew's ego. Relief at the prospect of building a life and career on my own terms. My sister Meg welcomed me with open arms and no questions, setting me up in her guest room with fresh towels and a bottle of wine. That night, as we sat on her couch, sharing the bottle and finally discussing what had happened, I felt the first hints of healing begin. I never liked him, Meg admitted, pouring me another glass. He always talked to you like you were his student, not his partner. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, not accusatory but genuinely curious. She shrugged. Would you have listened? You were so in love with him, with the life you were building. Sometimes people have to figure these things out for themselves. She was right, of course. I wouldn't have listened. I had been too enchanted by Andrew's charisma, too flattered by his initial interest, too invested in the narrative of us as publishing's golden couple. The worst part, I confessed, staring into my wine, is that I still don't think he understands what went wrong. He genuinely believes I'm throwing everything away over nothing. That's often how it goes with guys like Andrew, Meg said wisely. They can't see beyond their own perspective. Everything gets filtered through the lens of how it affects them. 2 days later, Jacob called with the formal job offer. The salary was significantly higher than what I was making at Bedford, and the role came with considerable creative control over Artemis's literary fiction list. We're expecting great things from you, Sarah, Jacob said warmly. I can't wait to see where you take us. I accepted on the spot, feeling a surge of excitement and validation. This was a fresh start in every sense, a recognition of my abilities and a chance to build something meaningful on my own terms. When I gave notice at Bedford, my boss Marcus expressed genuine regret at losing me, but understood the opportunity was too good to pass up. My colleagues threw me a goodbye lunch, presenting me with a first edition of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, an appropriate gift for this new chapter in my life. Over the next few weeks, I slowly rebuilt my life piece by piece. I found a small but charming apartment in Park Slope, not far from Meg but far enough from my old neighborhood with Andrew to avoid accidental encounters. I boxed and reclaimed my belongings from our shared apartment on a day when I knew he would be at work, leaving my key on the counter with a brief note wishing him well. Starting at Artemis was exhilarating. Jacob had assembled a talented, dedicated team that welcomed me warmly. The work was challenging and rewarding, with the freedom to pursue projects I truly believed in. For the first time in my career, I felt fully seen and valued for my editorial vision. Andrew and I had no contact during this period. I heard through industry gossip that he had received his promotion at Beacon, becoming their youngest executive editor as predicted. I felt a complex mix of emotions at the news, a lingering sadness for what might have been, coupled with relief that our professional paths were now firmly separated. Then, 3 months after our breakup, came the article in Publishers Weekly. Literary Rivals, the Evans-Caldwell feud reshapes publishing landscape. Read the headline. The piece detailed the long-standing professional rivalry between Jacob and Andrew, tracing it back to their days at Columbia and through various career milestones where they had competed for the same opportunities. What caught my attention, however, was the final paragraph. The rivalry has taken a personal turn in recent months, with Evans hiring Caldwell's former fiancée, Sarah Miller, as Artemis's new executive editor. Sources close to Caldwell described the move as deliberately provocative and a personal attack disguised as a professional acquisition. When asked for comment, Evans stated only that Sarah Miller's editorial talents speak for themselves. Her personal connections are irrelevant to her role at Artemis. I stared at the article in disbelief, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and humiliation. The piece reduced my career advancement to a mere pawn move in some ongoing chess game between two men. Worse, it suggested that my position had been given to me not because of my abilities, but because of my relationship history. Jacob called within the hour, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sarah, I'm sorry about that hatchet job. I want you to know that I've already contacted Publishers Weekly to demand a correction. Is it true? I asked, the question that had been plaguing me since I read the article. Did you offer me the job to get back at Andrew? Absolutely not, Jacob said firmly. "I offered you the job because you're the best person for it. Your work with Eliza Chen and your vision for literary fiction aligned perfectly with what Artemis needs. But you knew I was Andrew's fiancé," I pressed. There was a slight hesitation before Jacob answered. "Yes, I knew. The publishing world is small, Sarah. But that wasn't a factor in my decision. Except perhaps to make me wonder why someone as talented as you was being overlooked at Bedford. I wanted to believe him. Everything about my experience at Artemis thus far suggested that I had been hired on merit. The team respected me, the authors responded well to my editorial direction, and the first acquisitions under my leadership were performing strongly. The article quotes sources close to Caldwell," I said. "That has to be Andrew himself." "Almost certainly," Jacob agreed. "This is his attempt to undermine your accomplishments, to suggest you didn't earn your position." The realization stung, even though it shouldn't have surprised me. This was exactly the pattern I had identified in our relationship, Andrew's inability to accept my success without somehow diminishing it. "Don't let him get to you," Jacob advised. "Your work speaks for itself. Everyone who matters knows that." I thanked him for his support and ended the call, but the article continued to gnaw at me. Not because I doubted my abilities or my place at Artemis, but because it showed just how deeply Andrew's ego had been wounded by my departure and subsequent success. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. "Saw the PW article. Told you Evans was using you to get at me? Call when you're ready to admit I was right." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, Andrew couldn't see beyond his own perspective, couldn't consider that my career moves might have nothing to do with him. I deleted the text without responding and blocked the number. The next few weeks were challenging as I navigated the industry whispers and sideways glances that followed the article. Some people clearly believed I had obtained my position through my connection to Andrew rather than through merit. Others seemed to think I had orchestrated the whole situation as some elaborate revenge for our breakup. The truth, of course, was far simpler. I was a talented editor who had been offered an opportunity that recognized my abilities. The fact that my ex-fiancé and my new boss had a complicated history was an unfortunate coincidence, not the driving factor in my career decisions. I threw myself into my work with renewed determination, refusing to let the gossip distract me from what mattered. I acquired a brilliant debut novel by a young Nigerian author that went on to receive significant critical acclaim. I revitalized Artemis's poetry list, bringing in fresh voices that expanded our reach in that market. I mentored junior editors, sharing my knowledge and experience with the same generosity that had been shown to me. Slowly, the whispers died down. My accomplishments at Artemis began to speak for themselves, drowning out the noise of rumor and speculation. The publisher's weekly article faded from industry memory, replaced by news of the exciting projects emerging under my editorial direction. 6 months after the article, I attended the Frankfurt Book Fair, representing Artemis in international rights negotiations. The fair was a whirlwind of meetings, cocktail parties, and networking opportunities. On the second evening, at a reception hosted by a German publisher, I found myself face to face with Andrew for the first time since our breakup. He looked good. Successful, polished, every inch the rising star of Beacon Press. But there was something harder in his eyes now, a brittleness that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he greeted me, his tone carefully neutral. "Congratulations on the success of the Okafor novel. Impressive debut." "Thank you," I replied, equally controlled. "I heard your James Linden acquisition is performing well. The reviews have been excellent." An awkward silence fell between us, loaded with unspoken words and lingering resentments. "Are you happy?" he asked finally, the question catching me off guard with its directness. I considered deflecting, offering some professional platitude about career satisfaction. But the truth seemed simpler and more powerful. "Yes," I said. "I am." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of what he had lost. Before he could respond, Jacob appeared at my side, a proprietary hand on my elbow. "Sarah, the Hanover editor is looking for you. They're very interested in the memoir we discussed." Andrew's expression hardened as he took in Jacob's presence, the casual touch that suggested a closeness beyond professional collegiality. Without another word, he nodded stiffly and moved away, disappearing into the crowd of publishing professionals. "Everything okay?" Jacob asked, his voice pitched low for my ears only. "Fine," I assured him. "Just an overdue closure." The encounter with Andrew should have felt more momentous than it did. After all, this was the man I had planned to marry, the relationship that had shaped 2 years of my life. But standing there in Frankfurt, surrounded by the energy and excitement of the international publishing community, he seemed oddly diminished, a chapter in my story rather than its defining narrative. That night, back in my hotel room, I reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. I had lost what I thought was the love of my life, but gained a career that truly recognized my value. I had left the comfort of a shared apartment and established my own space, my own routines, my own independence. I had weathered industry gossip and emerged stronger, more confident in my abilities and my worth. Andrew's parting words, "You'll never find love again," now seemed not just cruel but absurd. Love wasn't limited to what we had shared. Love could take many forms, appear in unexpected places, and perhaps most importantly, love shouldn't require diminishing yourself to maintain someone else's sense of superiority. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: true optimism about the future, unburdened by someone else's expectations or limitations. Whatever came next, professionally or personally, would be on my terms, shaped by my choices, aligned with my values. The path forward was finally, completely my own. When I returned from Frankfurt, Jacob invited me to dinner to discuss the fair's outcomes and our strategy for the coming year. We went to a small Italian restaurant in the village, not unlike the one where Andrew had taken me on our first date. The similarity struck me as we settled into our booth, but the comparison ended there. Unlike Andrew, who had ordered for both of us in a display of cosmopolitan sophistication, Jacob asked about my preferences, engaged me in a discussion about the wine list, and deferred to my greater knowledge of Italian cuisine. It was a small difference, but a telling one, a relationship of equals rather than mentor and protégé. Frankfurt was a success by any measure, Jacob said as we clinked glasses. 3 major rights deals and serious interest in our entire spring list. The European publishers are starting to recognize the Artemis brand as a mark of quality. The team did amazing work preparing the rights packages, I acknowledged. And your reputation helped open doors that might have otherwise remained closed. Jacob shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. Don't deflect credit, Sarah. Your editorial vision is what sold those books. The team knows it, the agents know it, and I know it. I felt a flush of pleasure at his words, still unaccustomed to such direct praise after years of Andrew's measured, conditional approval. Thank you, I said simply. It means a lot to hear that. Jacob studied me over the rim of his wine glass, his expression thoughtful. You know, I've wanted to tell you something since that Publishers Weekly article came out. My guard went up slightly. The article was still a sore spot, a public reduction of my professional achievement to industry gossip. What's that? I asked carefully. When I offered you the job at Artemis, I did know you were engaged to Andrew Caldwell, he admitted, but not because it factored into my decision in any way. Then why mention it now? I asked, genuinely curious. Jacob set down his glass, his expression serious. Because I want there to be complete transparency between us. Yes, Andrew and I have a complicated history. We've been professional rivals for many years. But that has nothing to do with why I wanted you at Artemis. I believe you, I said, and I realized with some surprise that I did. Everything about my experience at Artemis had validated my skills and judgment. Jacob had proven himself to be a supportive, respectful colleague who valued my contributions. Good, he said, visibly relieved, because I've come to value not just your professional input but your friendship as well. And I wouldn't want that tainted by any misconceptions about my motives. The conversation shifted to other topics after that. Books we were excited about, authors we admired, changes in the publishing landscape. We shared stories about our early days in the industry, the mentors who had shaped our careers, the books that had made us fall in love with literature in the first place. By the time we finished dinner, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. Jacob Evans was not just my boss but a kindred spirit, someone who understood the peculiar passion that drove those of us who devoted our lives to bringing stories into the world. We should do this more often, Jacob said as we waited for the check. Not just to discuss work. There was a question in his eyes, a cautious invitation that I wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. My heart was still healing, my focus still primarily on rebuilding my career and sense of self. I'd like that, I replied honestly. As friends. He nodded, accepting the boundary without pressing. Friends it is. Over the next few months, our friendship deepened through regular dinners, shared literary discoveries, and the daily collaboration of building Artemis's reputation. Jacob never pushed for more, respecting the pace I had set, but I found myself increasingly drawn to his quiet confidence, his genuine respect for my abilities, his unabashed enthusiasm for the written word. Meanwhile, Andrew's presence in my life faded to occasional industry sightings and secondhand news. I heard through mutual connections that he was dating a young agent from ICM, that Beacon was expanding its literary fiction list under his direction, that he had purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. These details registered as mere information rather than emotional triggers, proof that the wound of our breakup had truly healed. Then came the night that would set in motion the most unexpected chapter of my story. Artemis was celebrating its 20th anniversary with a gala event at the Morgan Library. As executive editor, I had played a significant role in planning the celebration, working closely with Jacob to create an evening that honored the publisher's history while looking toward its future. The library was transformed for the occasion, with displays featuring Artemis's most notable publications throughout the years. Authors, agents, and industry professionals mingled among the exhibits, champagne flowing freely as conversations about books and ideas filled the historic space. I wore a midnight blue gown for the occasion, my red hair swept up in an elegant updo. As I moved through the room, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversations about our upcoming list, I felt a sense of professional confidence that was still relatively new but increasingly familiar. "You've done an amazing job with this event," Jacob said, appearing at my side with a fresh glass of champagne. "Everyone's talking about the Artemis Renaissance under your editorial direction." "Under our direction?" I corrected him, accepting the glass. "This is a partnership, Jacob." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes making my pulse quicken in a way I hadn't expected. A very successful one at that. Before our conversation could continue, a familiar voice interrupted from behind me. "Sarah." "Jacob. Congratulations on the anniversary." I turned to find Andrew standing there, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo, a beautiful blonde woman at his side. His expression was professionally pleasant, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he took in Jacob's proximity to me. "Andrew." I greeted him with polite warmth. "Thank you for coming. And you must be Valerie. I've heard wonderful things about your work at ICM." The blonde, presumably the agent he was dating, offered a tight smile. "Yes, that's right. Your reputation precedes you as well, Sarah. The Okafor novel was quite the coup. Sarah has an exceptional eye for talent," Jacob said, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of my back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "Artemis is fortunate to have her." Andrew's gaze flicked to Jacob's hand, then back to my face, a flash of something unreadable crossing his features. "Indeed. Well, we should circulate. Enjoy your evening." As they moved away, Jacob leaned in slightly. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly," I assured him, surprised to find it was true. Seeing Andrew with someone new registered as an observation rather than an emotional blow. "It's been over for a long time." Jacob nodded, his relief visible. "In that case, would you do me the honor of a dance? The quartet is playing, and I've been told I'm not entirely without rhythm." I laughed, setting down my champagne. "I'd be delighted to confirm that rumor for myself." He led me to the small dance floor where a string quartet was playing a waltz. As his hand settled on my waist and mine on his shoulder, I was struck by how natural it felt to be in his arms, how easily we found our rhythm together. "I've been wanting to do this for months," Jacob confessed as we moved among the other couples. "Dance with you, I mean." "Why didn't you ask?" I questioned, genuinely curious. His expression grew serious. "Because I wanted to be sure you were ready, that the shadow of Andrew Caldwell had truly passed." "And how do you know it has?" I challenged gently. Jacob smiled, his eyes never leaving mine. "Because you just saw him with someone else, and you're still here in my arms, smiling." He was right, of course. The sight of Andrew with Valerie had registered as nothing more than a footnote, a detail without emotional significance. Whatever power he had once held over my heart was gone, replaced by the freedom of genuine indifference. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked as the music shifted to a slower tempo. I considered evading, offering some light comment about the success of the evening or the quality of the champagne. But the truth seemed both simpler and more meaningful. "I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I want to be," I told him, both professionally and right now personally. His arms tightened around me slightly, drawing me closer. I was hoping you might say something like that. When he kissed me, in full view of the publishing elite of New York, it felt like the most natural progression imaginable. Not a dramatic declaration or a calculated move in some industry chess game, but the quiet culmination of months of growing respect, affection, and trust. I was vaguely aware of murmurs and glances around us, of the gossip this would undoubtedly generate. Somewhere in the room, Andrew might be watching, drawing his own conclusions about the timing and meaning of this development. But for perhaps the first time since I'd entered the publishing world, I didn't care about the industry narrative or professional perceptions. This moment wasn't about Andrew, or about proving anything to anyone. It was simply about two people who had found something genuine in each other, something worth exploring further. Later that night, as Jacob walked me home through the quiet streets of New York, we talked about what this shift in our relationship might mean, for us personally, for our professional collaboration at Artemis, for the inevitable industry speculation. "I want to be clear about something," Jacob said as we paused outside my building. "I value you first and foremost as an editor and creative partner. Whatever happens between us personally won't change that professional respect." "I know," I said, and I did. Unlike Andrew, whose support had always been conditional on maintaining his superior position, Jacob had consistently championed my work without trying to diminish my achievements. "And I don't want to rush this," he continued. "We can take it as slowly as you need." I smiled up at him, touched by his consideration. "I appreciate that. But I think we've already been taking it slowly for months now, don't you?" He laughed, drawing me closer. "True enough. In that case, may I take you to dinner tomorrow night? A proper date, not a work dinner disguised as one?" "I'd like that very much," I replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him goodnight. As I watched him walk away, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, the freedom of being valued for exactly who I was, without conditions or caveats. Whatever grew between Jacob and me would be built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine admiration, not the uneven power dynamic that had defined my relationship with Andrew. The next morning, I awoke to a text from Meg. "You and Jacob Evans? Front page of Page 6 Digital. Call me immediately." Sure enough, when I checked, there it was, a photo of Jacob and me kissing at the Artemis Gala under the headline, "Publishing Power Couple, Artemis's Evans Finds Love with Ex-Caldwell Fiancé." The article was predictably sensational, framing our relationship as the latest development in the ongoing Evans-Caldwell feud, and speculating about the romantic triangle that had supposedly been brewing since my hiring at Artemis. I sighed, unsurprised but disappointed by the reduction of my personal and professional choices to gossip fodder. After a moment's consideration, I called Jacob. "I've seen it," he said when he answered, skipping the greeting. "I'm sorry, Sarah. This is exactly what I was hoping to avoid." "It's not your fault," I assured him. "This is just how the industry is. Everything gets filtered through the lens of drama and competition. Still, I hate that they're framing your career and personal choices as mere reactions to Andrew Caldwell," Jacob said, frustration evident in his voice. "As if you have no agency of your own?" His indignation on my behalf, his immediate recognition of the sexist undertones in the coverage, only confirmed what I already knew, that Jacob saw me as a whole person, not an extension of himself or a pawn in some male rivalry. "Let them talk," I said with newfound certainty. "We know the truth. And ultimately our work will speak louder than any gossip. That's why Jacob stopped abruptly, then continued more carefully. "That's why I admire you so much. Your focus on what truly matters." I smiled at the near slip, the emotion he had almost revealed before pulling back. We were still in the early stages, still finding our way toward whatever we might become to each other. But for the first time since my breakup with Andrew, I felt ready to explore those possibilities with an open heart. Over the next few months, Jacob and I navigated the complexities of building both a personal and professional relationship. We established clear boundaries at work, maintaining our focus on Artemis's success while allowing our private connection to deepen after hours. The industry gossip faded as we neither confirmed nor denied the speculation, simply going about our business with professional dedication. Our personal relationship, meanwhile, flourished in the private moments we carved out amid our busy schedules: weekend mornings at the farmer's market, evening walks along the Hudson, quiet dinners where we discussed everything from book proposals to childhood memories. 6 months into our relationship, Jacob invited me to join him for a weekend at his family's lake house in the Adirondacks. Away from the pressures of work and the scrutiny of the publishing world, we relaxed into a different rhythm, swimming in the clear lake water, preparing meals together in the rustic kitchen, reading side by side on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. On our final evening, as we sat by a bonfire at the water's edge, Jacob turned to me with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've been thinking about us," he began, poking at the fire with a stick. "About where we're headed." I felt a flutter of anxiety, unsure what was coming. And I think it's important to acknowledge the reality of our situation," he continued. "We work together in senior positions at the same company. We're building a personal relationship while maintaining a professional one. It's complex." "It is," I agreed cautiously. "But we've been managing it well, I think." Jacob nodded, still focused on the fire. "We have. But I wonder sometimes if it's sustainable long term. If one relationship might eventually need to take precedence over the other." My heart sank slightly. Was this heading toward a choice? Artemis or Jacob? My career or our relationship? It seemed impossibly unfair after everything I'd built. "What are you saying?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jacob finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm saying that I'm in love with you, Sarah. Deeply, completely in love with you. And while I value our professional collaboration enormously, if I had to choose between having you in my life personally or professionally, I'd choose the personal connection without hesitation." The declaration took my breath away, not just the emotion behind it, but the fundamental respect it revealed. Unlike Andrew, who had seen my career as an extension of his own, Jacob was acknowledging that our professional relationship, valuable as it was ultimately less important than what we were building on a personal level. "I love you too," I said, the words coming easily now that they had been invited. "But I don't think we need to choose. We've proven we can maintain both relationships with integrity." Jacob reached for my hand, his expression serious. "I agree, but I wanted you to know where I stand. That your place in my life transcends Artemis or any professional consideration." As we sat there by the fire, hands intertwined, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I had been engaged to a man who claimed I would never find love again, whose support had been conditional on my remaining in his shadow. Now I was building a life with someone who valued my success as much as his own, who saw me as a whole person worthy of both professional respect and personal devotion. The irony wasn't lost on me, that in the aftermath of Andrew's cruel prediction, I had found not just professional fulfillment, but a deeper, more authentic love than anything I had experienced before. 2 weeks after our return from the Adirondacks, Jacob and I attended the National Book Awards ceremony in our official capacity as Artemis representatives. Artemis had 2 books nominated, one in fiction, one in nonfiction, and the event was both a professional obligation and a celebration of what we had built together over the past year. The ceremony was held at Cipriani Wall Street, a grand, ornate space filled with literary luminaries and publishing professionals. We moved through the pre-event reception, chatting with authors and agents, maintaining our professional demeanor despite the private understanding that now existed between us. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room. As I was washing my hands, the door opened and Valerie, Andrew's girlfriend, entered. Our eyes met in the mirror, her expression shifting from surprise to something more calculated. "Sarah," she greeted me with professional courtesy. "Congratulations on the nominations. Artemis is having quite the year under your direction." "Thank you," I replied, equally polite. "Your authors at ICM have had a strong showing as well." She moved to the sink beside me, opening her clutch to extract a lipstick. "You know," she said casually, "Andrew still talks about you sometimes." I kept my expression neutral, though internally I wondered where this was heading. "Does he?" Valerie applied her lipstick with precision, watching me in the mirror. "He says you were the one who got away, that he made a mistake in how he handled things." The revelation should have affected me more than it did. A year ago, those words might have sent my heart racing, might have rekindled dormant hopes. Now they registered as nothing more than an interesting piece of information about someone I used to know. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said honestly. "But it seems we've both moved on to better situations." Valerie capped her lipstick, her gaze sharpening. "Have we? Everyone knows you're with Evans now. The industry can't stop talking about it, how you went straight from Andrew to his biggest rival. Some people think it's a power move. Others think it's revenge. I turned to face her directly, tired of this narrative that refused to die. What I think, I said evenly, is that my personal and professional choices are my own. They're not about Andrew or about industry politics. They're about what makes me happy and fulfilled. Valerie studied me for a moment, then surprised me with a genuine smile. Good for you. For what it's worth, I think Andrew knows that too, deep down. He just doesn't like admitting he was wrong. With that, she snapped her clutch closed and headed for the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. Be careful with Evans, though. Men like him and Andrew, men who've been competing their whole lives, sometimes it's hard to separate the personal from the professional. After she left, I stood alone in the elegant bathroom, considering her words. Was there truth in what she said? Was Jacob's interest in me somehow entangled with his rivalry with Andrew, even unconsciously? But as I returned to the ceremony and found Jacob waiting for me, his face lighting up at my approach, I dismissed the doubt. Whatever complex history existed between the men, what Jacob and I had built was real, based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. I refused to let industry gossip or Andrew's regrets taint that reality. The evening progressed with speeches and awards, culminating in a win for our nonfiction title, a memoir by a Syrian refugee that had been my first acquisition at Artemis. As the author thanked me from the podium for believing in his story, I felt a profound sense of professional satisfaction, amplified by the pride I saw reflected in Jacob's eyes. Later, as we celebrated with champagne at the after-party, I caught sight of Andrew across the room, watching us with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met, he raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture that seemed to contain both congratulations and resignation. I returned the gesture, feeling not triumph or vindication, but a simple acknowledgement of our shared past and divergent paths. We had both moved forward, albeit in different directions. His prediction that I would never find love again had proven not just wrong, but almost laughably so. Jacob followed my gaze, noting the exchange with Andrew. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. I turned back to him, fully present in this moment and this relationship that had nothing to do with the past. "Everything is perfect," I assured him, meaning it completely. 3 months later, Jacob surprised me with a trip to Paris, ostensibly to meet with French publishers about potential translations, but primarily a romantic getaway to celebrate our first year together. We stayed in a charming hotel in Saint-Germain, wandered through bookshops and museums, and enjoyed long dinners at tiny bistros where no one knew or cared about New York publishing politics. On our final evening, as we strolled along the Seine at sunset, Jacob led me to a quiet spot overlooking the water and dropped to one knee. "Sarah Miller," he said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "This past year has been the most fulfilling of my life, both professionally and personally. You've changed me in ways I never expected, taught me what true partnership really means." He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by small diamonds. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" I stared at the ring, then at this man who had come into my life at exactly the right moment, who had recognized my value when I was struggling to see it clearly myself, who had supported my career without condition, who had shown me what love could be when it wasn't entangled with ego or control. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and certain. "Yes, I would love to marry you." As he slid the ring onto my finger, not replacing my engagement ring from Andrew, which had been returned months ago, but adorning a hand that had been deliberately, happily bare, I felt the completion of a circle I hadn't known I was drawing. When we announced our engagement upon returning to New York, the industry reaction was predictably mixed. Some genuinely congratulated us on finding both professional and personal happiness together. Others, inevitably, framed it through the lens of the Evans-Caldwell feud, suggesting that our marriage would be the ultimate culmination of a 2-decade rivalry. An article appeared in New York Magazine with the headline, "The Ultimate Checkmate, Publishing Rivals' Romantic Proxy War Ends in Engagement." The piece rehashed the entire history: my relationship with Andrew, our breakup, my move to Artemis, the development of my relationship with Jacob, all presented as calculated moves in some elaborate game between men. I read it once, then deleted it from my browser history. The narrative was so far removed from my lived experience that it barely registered as anything but fiction. The real story, of a woman finding her professional voice and her personal happiness on her own terms, was apparently less compelling to the tabloids than the idea of men using a woman as a pawn in their competitive games. What did register, however, was Andrew's quote at the end of the article, "I wish them both well. Sarah Miller is an extraordinary editor and a remarkable woman. Evans is a lucky man." The simple grace of this statement, so different from his bitter parting words a year earlier, suggested that perhaps Andrew had experienced his own growth during our time apart. I hoped that was true, not for my sake, but for his, and for Valerie, and for whoever else might come into his life. 6 months later, I walked down the aisle at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, my sister Meg serving as my maid of honor, my father proudly at my side. Jacob waited for me at the altar, his face radiating a joy that matched the fullness in my own heart. Our vows were simple but profound, promises to support each other's dreams, to maintain both independence and interdependence, to approach challenges as partners rather than adversaries. As Jacob slid the wedding band onto my finger to join the sapphire engagement ring, I felt a sense of rightness that transcended the tumultuous journey that had brought us here. At the reception, surrounded by friends, family, and select industry colleagues, Jacob pulled me onto the dance floor for our first dance as husband and wife. "Happy?" he asked as we moved to the music. "Completely," I assured him, resting my head against his shoulder. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, his arms tightening around me, "though I have a confession to make." I looked up, curious. "What's that?" A mischievous smile played at his lips. "I invited Andrew to the wedding." "Sent the invitation to his office at Beacon." I pulled back slightly, surprised. "You did what?" "Why?" Jacob's expression grew more serious. "Because I wanted him to see that what we have isn't about him, or about some rivalry, or about publishing politics. It's about us. Two people who found each other and built something genuine together." "Did he respond?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite myself. Jacob nodded. "A very polite decline and a generous gift delivered to Artemis. The card said simply, 'I was wrong. Wishing you both every happiness, Andrew.'" I absorbed this information, this final closing of a chapter that had once seemed so central to my story. Andrew Caldwell, the man who had claimed I would never find love again, who had tried to keep me confined to his shadow, acknowledging not just that he had been wrong, but that he could genuinely wish us well. As Jacob and I continued our dance, surrounded by the people who truly mattered in our lives, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey, from Andrew's fiancée to Jacob's wife, from junior editor to executive force in publishing, hadn't been about revenge or about proving anyone wrong. It had been about discovering my own worth, both professionally and personally, and building a life that honored that worth in all its dimensions. In the end, I hadn't married Jacob to hurt Andrew or to make some industry statement. I had married him because in his arms, I had found not just passion or companionship, but a true partnership of equals, the kind of love that expands rather than diminishes, that celebrates rather than controls, that sees clearly rather than through the distorting lens of ego or insecurity. And that, I realized as I looked up into my husband's loving eyes, was the sweetest revenge of all. Not marrying Andrew's worst enemy, but finding a love so true and equal that it rendered Andrew's prediction not just wrong, but utterly irrelevant to the joy-filled life I was now living. 3 years into my marriage with Jacob, the publishing industry had largely moved on from our scandalous beginning. We had settled into a comfortable routine, busy weekdays at Artemis, quiet weekends at our brownstone in Brooklyn, or Jacob's lake house in the Adirondacks, the occasional industry event where we now appeared as an established power couple rather than a controversial new pairing. My professional reputation had solidified beyond any lingering whispers about how I'd obtained my position. Under my editorial direction, Artemis had published 2 National Book Award winners and a Pulitzer finalist. I had personally discovered 3 debut novelists who had gone on to significant critical and commercial success. My name appeared regularly on publishing power lists, no longer with qualifying phrases like Caldwell's ex or Evans's protege. I had become simply and powerfully Sarah Evans, executive editor, literary tastemaker, a force in my own right. Jacob and I maintained our delicate balance of professional collaboration and personal intimacy. At work, we were respectful colleagues who occasionally disagreed, but always found productive compromises. At home, we were passionate partners, best friends, and each other's most trusted confidants. The industry speculation about our relationship being some elaborate chess move in a decades-long rivalry had faded into obscurity, replaced by genuine admiration for both our publishing success and our evident happiness. We had discussed having children, deciding ultimately to wait another year or two until Artemis completed its expansion into the educational market, a project I was spearheading and couldn't delegate during its critical initial phase. At 45, Jacob was in no rush, and at 34, I felt I had time to establish my career further before embracing motherhood. Our life together felt abundant, purposeful, and remarkably drama-free, which is why I was completely unprepared for the email that appeared in my inbox on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. From andrew.caldwell@beaconpress.com. Subject, potential joint venture date, October 15, 2019, 9:42 a.m. Dear Sarah, I hope this email finds you well. I'm reaching out regarding a potential collaborative project between Beacon and Artemis that I believe would benefit both our houses. As you may have heard, Beacon recently acquired Legacy Literary Archives, the estate management company that controls the rights to several major 20th century authors. While exploring the archives, we've discovered substantial unpublished material from Eleanor Westfield, including what appears to be a complete novel manuscript written shortly before her death. Given Artemis's strong connection to Westfield's published work, I understand you control the rights to her entire published catalog, and your personal expertise in her writing, a joint publication would make tremendous sense from both a legal and marketing perspective. Would you be open to a preliminary discussion about how such a collaboration might work? I've already spoken with Marcus at Bedford about your past work on Westfield's catalog, and he speaks very highly of your expertise in this area. I understand that our personal history might make this request awkward, but I hope we can approach this as the professionals I know us both to be. Best regards, Andrew Caldwell, Executive Publisher, Beacon Press. I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times to ensure I'd understood correctly. Andrew Caldwell, the man I hadn't spoken to in over 3 years, the man who had once told me I'd never find love again, the man whose professional rival I had married, was proposing a collaboration. And not just any collaboration, but one centered around Eleanor Westfield, the 20th century feminist author whose work had been central to my early career success. During my time at Bedford, I had spearheaded the reissue of Westfield's complete works with new critical introductions, a project that had earned significant attention and solidified my reputation as an editor with both commercial instincts and scholarly inclinations. When I moved to Artemis, Jacob had acquired the Westfield catalog as one of our first major rights purchases, partly because of the author's cultural significance, and partly, I suspected, because he knew how much her work meant to me personally. The discovery of a previously unknown Westfield manuscript was enormous news, the literary equivalent of finding a lost Picasso. If authentic and of reasonable quality, such a publication would generate significant sales, critical attention, and industry prestige for whoever published it. And Andrew was suggesting we do it together. My finger hovered over the delete key, my first instinct to reject this overture outright. Why would I want to work with Andrew after everything that had happened between us? Why would I complicate my now peaceful life by reintroducing such a fraught relationship into it? Why would I risk the professional reputation I'd worked so hard to establish by tying it to a project with my ex-fiancé? But the editor in me, the book person who had fallen in love with Westfield's sharp prose and revolutionary ideas as an undergraduate, couldn't dismiss the opportunity so easily. Eleanor Westfield had been a literary hero of mine, her unflinching examinations of women's lives in post-war America, both critically important and personally meaningful. The chance to bring her final work into the world, to complete her literary legacy, was genuinely tempting regardless of the complications it might entail. I closed the email without responding and walked down the hall to Jacob's office. His assistant waved me in with a smile, accustomed to my impromptu visits. Jacob looked up from his computer, his face softening as it always did when I entered his space. This is a pleasant surprise. What brings you to my humble corner of the empire? I closed the door behind me before speaking. Andrew Caldwell just emailed me. He wants to discuss a joint publication between Beacon and Artemis. Jacob's expression shifted, surprise followed by wariness. That's unexpected. What kind of project? I sat in the chair across from his desk, handing him my phone with the email displayed. He read it carefully, his brow furrowing slightly as he absorbed the information. A previously unknown Westfield manuscript, he said, finally looking up. That would be significant. Extremely, I agreed. If it's authentic and publishable. And Beacon needs our cooperation because we control the rights to her published works. Jacob mused, handing back my phone. Legally, they could publish the manuscript independently, but from a marketing and scholarly perspective, a joint publication makes more sense. I nodded. It would be confusing for readers and the literary community if Westfield's final novel came from a different publisher than all her other work. Not impossible, but definitely less than ideal. Jacob leaned back in his chair, studying me with thoughtful eyes. The question is, how do you feel about working with Andrew again? This would require substantial direct interaction. I appreciated that his first concern was for my personal comfort rather than the business opportunity. I honestly don't know, I admitted. My initial reaction was to delete the email and pretend I never received it. But professionally speaking, this is exactly the kind of project Artemis should be involved in. Westfield's work is important, and if there's really an unpublished novel, we have a responsibility to her legacy and to literature itself, Jacob finished, understanding immediately. It was one of the things I loved most about him, his genuine reverence for the written word, his belief in publishing as a cultural stewardship rather than merely a business. Yes, I agreed, but I'd be lying if I said the prospect of working with Andrew doesn't make me uncomfortable. Jacob was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the implications. You don't have to decide immediately, he said finally. And remember, if we do move forward, this would be a professional collaboration governed by contracts and involving teams from both houses. You wouldn't be working with Andrew in isolation. True, I acknowledged, finding some comfort in that reality. And it has been 3 years. We're both in different places now. You certainly are, Jacob said with a slight smile. You've established yourself as one of the most respected editors in the industry, completely on your own merits. You'd be approaching this as equals. Actually, given your expertise on Westfield, you'd be bringing more to the table than he would. His words bolstered my confidence, reminding me of how much had changed since I had left Andrew. I was no longer the junior editor seeking approval and validation. I was an industry leader secure in my abilities and accomplishments. I think I should at least have the preliminary conversation. I decided. See what exactly they've found and what kind of arrangement they're proposing. We can make decisions from there. Jacob nodded, his expression both supportive and slightly protective. That seems reasonable. Would you like me to be part of that initial meeting? I considered the offer, touched by his concern but also aware that my relationship with Andrew was my own to manage. I appreciate that, but I think it's better if I handle this first conversation myself. Establish the new dynamic clearly from the start. Whatever you decide, I support you, Jacob said, reaching across the desk to squeeze my hand briefly. Professionally and personally, I returned to my office and composed a carefully worded reply to Andrew, agreeing to a preliminary meeting while establishing clear professional boundaries. I suggested meeting at a neutral location rather than either publishing house, and proposed bringing our respective rights directors to ensure the conversation remained properly focused. His response came within the hour, accepting my conditions and suggesting a private room at the Harvard Club the following week. It was a strategic choice on his part. The Harvard Club was prestigious without being overly intimate, a setting that emphasized our shared professional standing. I confirmed the arrangement, then spent the next several days alternately preparing for the meeting and questioning my decision to agree to it at all. When the day arrived, I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority, subtle but expensive jewelry, including the sapphire ring from Jacob that had replaced Andrew's emerald. Looking in the mirror before leaving my office, I barely recognized the uncertain young editor who had once oriented her professional identity around Andrew's approval. The woman who gazed back at me was confident, accomplished, and completely her own person. The Harvard Club was busy with the lunch crowd when I arrived. Businessmen and academics clustered around tables discussing deals and theories with equal intensity. I gave Andrew's name at the reception desk and was directed to a small private dining room at the back of the club. He was already there when I entered, standing as the door opened, looking much the same as the last time I'd seen him, handsome in a conventional way, impeccably dressed, projecting the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His hair had a touch more gray at the temples, and new lines creased the corners of his eyes, but otherwise time seemed to have treated him kindly. "Sarah," he greeted me, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Andrew," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Professional, impersonal. Where's your rights director?" I thought we agreed this would be a team meeting. A flicker of something embarrassment? Apology crossed his face. "I apologize for the miscommunication. Diane was called to an emergency meeting with our legal team about an unrelated matter. She sends her regrets." I hesitated at the doorway, suddenly uncomfortable with the prospect of a one-on-one meeting. I should have been notified. My rights director rearranged her schedule to be here. "I only learned about it an hour ago," Andrew explained, seeming genuinely contrite. "I considered rescheduling but didn't want to inconvenience you, especially knowing how busy you are. We can certainly reschedule if you prefer, or keep this initial conversation broad and save the specifics for when our full teams can be present." I weighed my options. Rescheduling would mean delaying information about the Westfield manuscript, which my professional curiosity was eager to learn. Proceeding alone with Andrew felt uncomfortably personal, a step back into a dynamic I had worked hard to escape. But refusing to meet without backup might also suggest I wasn't as fully past our history as I claimed to be. "We can proceed with a preliminary discussion," I decided, taking a seat at the table. "But anything substantive will need to be revisited with our full teams." "Of course," he agreed, returning to his own chair. "I've taken the liberty of ordering tea. I remember you preferred Earl Grey in the afternoons." The fact that he recalled this small detail about me was both unsurprising — Andrew had always been observant — and vaguely unsettling. It introduced a personal note that I would have preferred to avoid. "Thank you," I said neutrally, accepting a cup from the server who appeared moments later. "Now tell me about this Westfield manuscript. How was it discovered? What's its condition? Has its authenticity been verified?" Andrew seemed to appreciate my businesslike approach, shifting smoothly into professional mode. The manuscript was found in a sealed box among Eleanor Westfield's personal effects, which were acquired by Legacy Literary Archives last year. The box contained correspondence between Westfield and her agent about a novel titled The Invisible Thread, along with a complete typescript approximately 300 pages in length. My pulse quickened despite myself. Eleanor Westfield was known to have been working on a final novel before her death in 1981, but literary historians had generally assumed the manuscript was either never completed or lost. The discovery of a finished typescript was genuinely exciting. "Has it been authenticated?" I pressed, trying to contain my enthusiasm. Andrew nodded. "Preliminary authentication looks very promising. The typescript is on Westfield's preferred brand of paper, typed on what appears to be her personal typewriter based on character alignment and distinctive key marks. The handwritten corrections in the margins match verified samples of her handwriting, and the manuscript's themes and style are consistent with her known work, particularly her later period." "What's it about?" I couldn't help asking, my editorial curiosity overwhelming my determination to remain detached. A small smile played at Andrew's lips, recognizing the genuine interest I couldn't conceal. "It appears to be a semi-autobiographical account of a female writer in the 1970s literary scene in New York, examining the gender politics of publishing and the struggle to be taken seriously as a woman in a male-dominated industry." My interest deepened further. The subject matter was perfectly aligned with current conversations about gender and power in the workplace, making the manuscript not just a literary discovery, but a potentially significant contribution to contemporary discourse. "And why come to Artemis?" I asked, returning to the business at hand. "As you noted in your email, Beacon could technically publish this independently, though it would be awkward from a marketing perspective." Andrew set down his teacup, his expression turning more serious. "2 reasons. First, the practical one. Artemis controls the rights to Westfield's published catalog, and a joint publication would allow for more comprehensive marketing, possibly including a boxed set of her complete works or other packages that would benefit both houses." "And the second reason?" I prompted when he paused. He met my eyes directly, his gaze steady. "You're the foremost editorial expert on Westfield's work. The critical editions you developed at Bedford were exceptional, combining scholarly rigor with genuine appreciation for her artistic vision. This manuscript deserves that same care and understanding. No one is better qualified to edit Westfield's final work than you, Sarah." The compliment was unexpected and, from a professional standpoint, difficult to dismiss. I had spent years studying Westfield's writing, developing a deep understanding of her themes, preoccupations, and stylistic evolution. The opportunity to work with previously unknown material from an author I deeply admired was genuinely tempting. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, trying to maintain professional distance despite my growing interest. "A true collaboration," Andrew replied. "Beacon and Artemis would co-publish, sharing costs, resources, and profits. You would be the primary editor, working directly with the manuscript. I would handle the logistics of authentication, rights clearances, and coordination with the Westfield estate. We would develop a marketing plan that leverages both houses' strengths and potentially creates new interest in Westfield's entire body of work." It was, objectively speaking, a reasonable proposal that recognized both the practical realities of the situation and the specific expertise each of us could bring to the project. The arrangement would benefit Artemis financially and enhance my professional reputation as the editor who brought Eleanor Westfield's final work to light. But working directly with Andrew, even in a strictly professional capacity, felt fraught with potential complications. Our history was complex, our parting bitter, and while I had moved on completely, building a fulfilling life and career independent of him, I wasn't certain he had achieved the same closure. "I'll need to discuss this with our team at Artemis," I said finally, "and I'd want any agreement to include very clear parameters about work processes, decision-making authority, and division of responsibilities." "Of course," Andrew agreed readily. "I would expect nothing less. Take whatever time you need to consider the proposal. The manuscript has remained undiscovered for almost 40 years. A few more weeks won't matter." As we concluded the meeting, Andrew hesitated, then spoke in a more personal tone than he had used thus far. "I want you to know that I understand why you might have reservations about working with me. Our history is complicated, but I hope you'll consider this opportunity purely on its merits. Eleanor Westfield deserves to have her final work brought into the world with the care and expertise only you can provide." It was a skillful appeal to my professional ethics and my personal connection to Westfield's work. Whether calculated or genuine, it managed to sidestep our personal history while acknowledging its existence, a diplomatic balance that reminded me of the political acumen that had always been one of Andrew's strengths. "I'll be in touch after I've discussed it with my team," I said, gathering my notes and standing to leave. As I turned to go, Andrew added, "For what it's worth, Sarah, I'm genuinely happy for you. Your success at Artemis has been remarkable. You've become exactly the editor I always knew you could be." I paused, unsure how to respond to this unexpected personal comment. There was no obvious condescension in his tone, no undercurrent of claim or possession, just what appeared to be sincere acknowledgement of my professional accomplishments. "Thank you," I said simply, and left without further comment. The taxi ride back to Artemis gave me time to process the meeting. The Westfield manuscript was undeniably significant, a major literary discovery that could become one of the publishing events of the year if handled properly. Working on it would be professionally rewarding and personally meaningful given my long-standing admiration for the author. But collaborating with Andrew would inevitably reintroduce complexity into what had become a straightforward, fulfilling life. Even if we maintained strict professional boundaries, the connection would revive industry gossip, requiring Jacob and me to navigate renewed speculation about the triangle the media had so gleefully constructed during my early days at Artemis. More importantly, I wasn't entirely confident in Andrew's motives. His proposal made business sense, and his praise of my editorial skills seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the suspicion that there might be other factors at play, perhaps a desire to rehabilitate his image in my eyes, or even to disrupt the life I had built without him. Back at Artemis, I went straight to Jacob's office, finding him in a meeting with our marketing director. He excused himself when he saw me at the door, sensing from my expression that our conversation couldn't wait. "How was it?" he asked once we were alone in his office. "Complicated," I admitted, removing my jacket and settling into the chair across from his desk. The Westfield manuscript is real, a complete novel that appears to be authentic based on preliminary examination. The subject matter is incredibly relevant to current discussions about gender and power in publishing. From a pure content perspective, it's exactly the kind of project Artemis should be involved in. "But," Jacob prompted, knowing there was more, "but working with Andrew would be challenging." Even with clearly defined parameters, it would mean regular interaction with someone whose presence in my life was ultimately destructive. Someone who once told me I'd never find love again, who consistently undermined my confidence and accomplishments. Jacob listened thoughtfully, his expression concerned but not possessive. Do you feel he's changed? That he sees you differently now? I considered the question carefully. He certainly presented himself as recognizing my professional accomplishments. There was none of the condescension that characterized our relationship before. But I don't know if that represents genuine growth or just adaptation to our new relative positions. And what's your gut telling you about his motives in seeking this collaboration specifically with you? It was such a Jacob question, focused not on his own feelings or potential jealousy, but on my instincts and well-being. His security in our relationship, his trust in my judgment, contrasted sharply with Andrew's possessiveness and constant need for superiority. Professionally, his reasoning makes sense, I acknowledged. I do have unique expertise with Westfield's work, and the joint publication has clear business advantages. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something more, something personal, behind the overture. Jacob nodded, taking this in. If we set aside potential personal complications for a moment, is this a project you'd want to be involved in? If it were any other publisher approaching us, would you be excited about it? Without question, I admitted immediately. Westfield was a transformative author for me personally, and a significant figure in American literature. Being involved in bringing her final work to light would be meaningful on multiple levels. Then perhaps we need to create a structure that allows you to engage with the material while minimizing direct interaction with Andrew, Jacob suggested. We could assemble a team approach, you as primary editor, but with support staff who could handle much of the day-to-day communication with Beacon. The possibility was appealing, a way to honor Westfield's legacy and my own connection to her work without reopening old wounds or inviting complication into my life. That might work, I agreed cautiously. Though Andrew specifically emphasized my personal involvement as a key factor in the collaboration. Of course he did, Jacob said with a slight smile. But that doesn't mean we have to accept those terms exactly as presented. We can counter with an arrangement that protects both your professional interests and your personal boundaries. We spent the next hour outlining what such an arrangement might look like, a detailed collaboration agreement that would keep me focused on the manuscript itself, while assigning other team members to handle routine communication with Beacon. Jacob, as publisher, would negotiate the broader terms with Andrew directly, creating an additional buffer between us. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? I asked Jacob finally. Being the intermediary between your wife and her ex-fiancé isn't exactly a standard part of a publisher's job description. Jacob reached across the desk to take my hand, his expression warm and certain. Sarah, nothing about our relationship has ever been standard. We've always been partners in multiple dimensions, professional and personal. This is just another opportunity to support each other in both capacities. His understanding and lack of jealousy reminded me yet again of why our relationship worked so well. Unlike Andrew, who had viewed my success as a threat to his ego, Jacob genuinely celebrated my accomplishments and opportunities, even when they came with complications. I love you, I said simply, and I'm grateful every day that I found my way to you. Even when the path included someone who once claimed you'd never find love again? Jacob asked with a gentle smile. Especially then, I replied, because proving him wrong led me to something far better than I ever had with him. Over the next few days, we developed a formal response to Beacon's proposal, outlining our conditions for the collaboration. The counterproposal maintained the co-publishing arrangement, but restructured the workflow to limit direct interaction between Andrew and me. Jacob would serve as primary liaison at the management level, while a team of Artemis staff would handle day-to-day coordination with their Beacon counterparts. I would focus exclusively on the manuscript itself, evaluating its literary merit, determining what editorial work might be needed, and developing the scholarly apparatus to contextualize this final work within Westfield's broader canon. I would participate in key meetings about publication strategy and marketing, but with Jacob or other Artemis representatives present. When we sent the counter-proposal, I half expected Andrew to reject what could be perceived as an attempt to minimize his contact with me. Instead, he responded with prompt acceptance and what seemed like genuine understanding of my desire for professional distance. The proposed structure makes excellent sense, he wrote in his email response. It leverages our respective strengths while establishing clear lines of communication. I appreciate your thoughtful approach to this collaboration and look forward to bringing Westfield's final work to the audience it deserves. With the parameters established, we moved forward. Beacon sent a high-quality digital scan of the manuscript for my initial review, along with the authentication materials they had gathered. The moment I opened the file and saw the first page, with its distinctive typewriter font and Westfield's characteristic margin notes, I knew I had made the right decision regardless of the complications. The Invisible Thread by Eleanor Westfield was exactly as Andrew had described, a semi-autobiographical account of a female writer navigating the male-dominated publishing industry of the 1970s. The protagonist, Claire Marlowe, was a thinly veiled version of Westfield herself, while the publishing figures around her represented composite portraits of real-life editors, agents, and publishers from that era. The novel was extraordinary, sharper and more direct than Westfield's previous work, with a biting critique of gender politics in literary circles and a clear-eyed examination of power dynamics in creative industries. It felt simultaneously of its time and startlingly relevant to current conversations about workplace equality and the Me Too movement. As I immersed myself in the manuscript, the awkwardness of collaborating with Beacon and Andrew receded. My focus narrowed to the text itself, to the privilege of being among the first to engage with this lost work by an author I had long admired. I developed extensive notes, identified places where light editorial intervention might be needed, and began drafting an introduction that would contextualize the novel within both Westfield's career and the literary landscape of the 1970s. The collaboration proceeded more smoothly than I had anticipated. Andrew respected the boundaries we had established, directing most communication through our respective teams. When we did need to interact directly during larger planning meetings, he maintained a consistently professional demeanor, focused entirely on the project rather than our personal history. 3 months into the project, as we approached the final stages of manuscript preparation, Jacob and I hosted a dinner meeting at our home with the core team from both publishing houses. It was a strategic decision. Holding the meeting in our personal space emphasized that I was now part of a strong partnership, that my connection to Andrew was firmly in the past. Andrew arrived with Diane, the rights director who had missed our initial meeting, and 2 members of Beacon's marketing team. If he felt any discomfort entering the home I shared with Jacob, he concealed it well, complimenting the architecture of our brownstone and graciously accepting the glass of wine Jacob offered. The dinner itself was a marvel of professional courtesy. We discussed publication timelines, marketing strategies, and launch events with the focused efficiency of colleagues united by a common purpose. Andrew contributed thoughtfully, but never dominated the conversation, frequently deferring to me on matters related to the manuscript's content and literary significance. As the evening wound down and our teams began gathering their things to leave, Andrew asked if he could speak with me privately for a moment. Jacob caught my eye across the room, his expression making it clear that the choice was entirely mine. "Of course," I agreed, leading Andrew to my home office, a book-lined room overlooking our small garden, where Jacob and I often spent Sunday mornings reading side by side. "Thank you for hosting tonight," Andrew said once we were alone, "and for your exceptional work on the manuscript. Your introduction is brilliant. It contextualizes the novel perfectly while highlighting its contemporary relevance." "Thank you," I replied, maintaining a professional tone. "It's been a fascinating project to work on." Andrew nodded, glancing around the office, his gaze lingering on the framed photograph of Jacob and me on our wedding day that sat on my desk. "You seem happy, Sarah." "Truly happy." The observation caught me off guard with its directness and apparent sincerity. "I am," I confirmed, unsure where this conversation was heading. He turned back to me, his expression more vulnerable than I had seen it in years. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not the perfunctory acknowledgement I sent with that wedding gift." I remained silent, neither encouraging nor discouraging this unexpected turn toward the personal. "When we broke up," he continued, "I said things that were cruel and entirely untrue. I told you you'd never find love again, that no one would ever want you the way I did." He shook his head, regret evident in his expression. "It was petty and false, born of my own wounded ego and inability to see you as truly separate from me." The acknowledgement was unexpected, not just of his hurtful words, but of the underlying dynamic that had ultimately doomed our relationship. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, genuinely curious. Andrew gestured vaguely around the room at the evidence of my thriving life. Because working with you these past months, seeing the editor and woman you've become, the life you've built, it's made me realize how wrong I was. Not just about your future prospects for happiness, but about who you were even then. I considered his words, trying to discern whether this was genuine contrition or some more complicated agenda. I appreciate the apology, Andrew, but it's not necessary. That chapter of my life closed a long time ago. I know, he said quickly. I'm not seeking forgiveness or trying to reopen anything. I just thought you deserved to hear the words explicitly. That I was wrong. About everything. There was something almost childlike in his need to have this acknowledged, to be absolved of the pain he had caused. In that moment, I saw clearly how much our relationship had been shaped by his insecurities, his need to be superior, his inability to celebrate success that didn't center him. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I hope you found happiness too. A complicated expression crossed his face. I'm getting there. Valerie and I broke up last year. It took losing her to realize I was repeating the same patterns that destroyed what you and I had. I've been working on that. Therapy, actually. The admission surprised me. Andrew had always dismissed therapy as navel-gazing for people too weak to fix their own problems. That he was now willingly engaging in it suggested a level of self-reflection I wouldn't have credited him with. That's good to hear, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't wish him ill. Personal growth is always valuable. He nodded, seeming to accept that this was all the response I was going to offer. Well, I should join the others. Thank you again for your work on the manuscript. It's going to be a significant publication, largely due to your contributions. As I showed him out, rejoining the group in the living room, I felt an unexpected lightness. Andrew's apology hadn't changed anything about our past or altered my feelings about our relationship, but it had provided a kind of closure I hadn't realized I still needed, an explicit acknowledgement of the dynamic that had made our partnership ultimately untenable. Later that night, after our guests had departed, I related the conversation to Jacob as we prepared for bed. That's surprisingly mature of him, Jacob observed, sounding genuinely impressed. Do you think he meant it? I considered the question, replaying Andrew's words and expression in my mind. I do, actually. There was a humility there I never saw during our relationship. He seemed genuinely reflective about his own behavior. Jacob sat on the edge of our bed, watching me remove my jewelry. And how do you feel about it? His apology, I mean. Validated, I suppose, I said after a moment's thought. For years, I carried this suspicion that maybe I had overreacted, that perhaps I had misinterpreted his behavior through some distorted lens of my own insecurities. Hearing him acknowledge the exact dynamic I experienced, it confirms that I wasn't imagining things. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. That kind of validation can be healing, even years later. It doesn't change anything, I clarified, wanting to be absolutely clear. It doesn't make me question any of the decisions I made or the life I've built. If anything, it reinforces that I made the right choice in leaving. I never thought otherwise, Jacob assured me, pulling me gently onto his lap. But I'm glad you got that closure. Everyone deserves to have their reality acknowledged, especially when it involves harm done to them. I leaned against him, grateful yet again for his emotional intelligence, his ability to celebrate my healing without making it about himself. Have I told you lately how different you are from him? How grateful I am for that difference. Jacob smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. You might have mentioned it once or twice, but I'm always happy to hear it again. The Westfield project continued to progress smoothly. The manuscript required minimal editing, mostly clarification of references that would be obscure to contemporary readers, and correction of a few inconsistencies in the narrative. The bulk of my work involved developing supplementary materials, a comprehensive introduction, explanatory notes, and an afterword discussing the novel's place in Westfield's body of work. Throughout the process, Andrew maintained the professional distance we had established, engaging directly only when necessary and always with appropriate collegiality. If the personal conversation in my office had changed anything, it was only to remove a certain tension from our limited interactions, replacing it with a more relaxed professionalism. 6 months after our initial meeting at the Harvard Club, The Invisible Thread was ready for publication. The advance copies were beautiful, a striking cover design featuring a stylized typewriter with red ribbon forming the titular thread, binding together pages that seemed to be flying away. The novel itself was presented as I had envisioned it, Westfield's text largely untouched, with my scholarly apparatus providing context without overwhelming the author's voice. The advance reviews were everything we had hoped for, glowing assessments of the novel's literary merit and cultural significance, with particular praise for the thoughtful way it had been presented to contemporary readers. My introduction received specific mention in several major reviews, described as illuminating, insightful, and a masterclass in literary contextualization. Beacon and Artemis jointly planned a major launch event at the New York Public Library, a fitting venue for the debut of a significant literary discovery. The guest list included critics, scholars, publishing professionals, and devoted Westfield readers. As the editor who had shaped the presentation of the discovered manuscript, I would be one of the featured speakers, along with a Westfield biographer and a prominent feminist literary critic. The night of the launch, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress I had chosen for the occasion. The color was a conscious choice, similar to but distinct from the emerald engagement ring Andrew had once given me, a subtle statement that I had reclaimed everything, even the colors associated with our past. Jacob appeared behind me, handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes warm as they met mine in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said, resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. "And more importantly, you look ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, turning to face him. "Ready to stand in front of that room as the accomplished editor you are, presenting a significant literary work you helped bring into the world, completely on your own merits." He smiled, pride evident in his expression. "Ready to close this circle in the most powerful way possible, not through drama or confrontation, but through professional excellence." I realized he was right. Tonight's event represented a kind of completion, not just of the Westfield project, but of my own journey from Andrew's shadow to full professional and personal autonomy. I would be speaking as Sarah Evans, executive editor at Artemis Books, recognized expert on Eleanor Westfield's work, not as Andrew Caldwell's ex-fiancée or Jacob Evans's wife, but as myself, defined by my own accomplishments and expertise. "I am ready," I agreed, reaching up to straighten his tie, "and grateful to have you by my side as I do it." The New York Public Library was transformed for the event, with displays featuring Westfield's previous works alongside the new publication. Attendees moved through the space with glasses of champagne, examining the exhibits and engaging in animated conversations about the discovery and its significance. I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations and discussing the editorial decisions that had shaped the final publication. Jacob moved separately through the crowd, giving me space to shine independently while remaining a supportive presence I could catch glimpses of across the room. Andrew arrived midway through the reception, accompanied by his team from Beacon. He greeted me with professional warmth, complimenting the final product and the early reviews. "Your introduction has been singled out in nearly every piece of coverage," he noted. "Rightly so, it's exceptional work." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the praise as I would from any colleague. The whole team did remarkable work bringing this to fruition. When the formal program began, I took my place at the podium, looking out at the assembled literary community of New York. I spoke about the significance of Westfield's work, the remarkable discovery of The Invisible Thread, and the novel's uncanny relevance to contemporary conversations about gender and power in professional spaces. In many ways, I concluded, this novel serves as both historical document and present-day mirror, forcing us to examine how far we've come in addressing the gender inequities Westfield identified 5 decades ago, and how far we still have to go. It's been the privilege of my career to help bring this final work to the audience it has always deserved. The applause was warm and genuine, continuing as I returned to my seat beside Jacob, who squeezed my hand in silent support. The Westfield biographer spoke next, followed by the feminist critic, both building on themes I had introduced while adding their own perspectives on the novel's significance. Andrew was the final speaker, representing Beacon Press as the discoverer of the manuscript. He spoke eloquently about the responsibility of publishers as cultural stewards, about the importance of preserving and presenting literary legacies with integrity and care. Then, to my surprise, he turned the focus directly to me. "This publication would not have been possible without the scholarly rigor and editorial vision of Sarah Evans," he said, his gaze finding me in the audience. Her deep understanding of Westfield's work and her commitment to presenting this final novel in its proper context has transformed what might have been merely a literary curiosity into a significant cultural event. The publishing community and readers everywhere owe her a debt of gratitude for her exceptional work on this project. The praise was generous and public, devoid of the subtle undermining that had characterized his acknowledgments of my work during our relationship. It represented, in its way, the completion of a circle, a relationship that had begun with professional admiration, deteriorated into competitive diminishment, and now concluded with genuine professional respect. As the formal program ended and guests returned to mingling, I found myself approached by a woman I recognized as the literary director of Legacy Archives, the organization that had discovered the Westfield manuscript. "Ms. Evans," she greeted me warmly. "Your work on this project has been remarkable. I wanted to let you know that we've recently acquired several other literary estates that might benefit from your expertise." "That's very kind," I replied, intrigued by the possibility of similar projects. "I'd be happy to discuss potential collaborations." "Excellent," she said, handing me her card. "And please know that my admiration predates this project. Your critical editions of Westfield's earlier works were what prompted me to suggest you specifically when the manuscript was discovered." I blinked in surprise. I was under the impression that Andrew Caldwell initiated the collaboration. The woman looked momentarily confused. "Mr. Caldwell certainly facilitated the connection, but it was Legacy Archives that specifically requested your involvement. We made it a condition of our agreement with Beacon that you be approached as the primary editor, given your established expertise with Westfield's work." This new information shifted my understanding of how the project had come to me. Andrew had presented the collaboration as his idea, emphasizing his recognition of my expertise as the motivating factor. Now it appeared that he had been responding to a condition imposed by the archives, a significantly different narrative than the one he had presented. Before I could process this fully, Jacob appeared at my side, smoothly joining the conversation. As they discussed Legacy's other literary holdings, I glanced across the room and found Andrew watching us, his expression unreadable from this distance. Had he deliberately misrepresented the origins of the project? Had he presented himself as the initiator of a collaboration that had actually been imposed on him as a condition? And if so, why? To appear magnanimous? To create a sense of indebtedness? To establish a connection that might not have otherwise existed? These questions lingered as the evening continued, but I found myself less troubled by them than I might once have been. Whether Andrew had been entirely forthcoming about how the project came to me or not, the work itself had been valuable and rewarding. My contribution had been significant and widely recognized, and most importantly, Eleanor Westfield's final novel had been properly presented to the world, enriching our understanding of an important literary figure. As the event wound down, Jacob and I prepared to leave, saying our goodbyes to colleagues and guests. Andrew approached as we were collecting our things, his expression slightly hesitant. "Thank you both for a successful collaboration," he said, extending his hand first to Jacob, then to me. "The result speaks for itself." "It does," Jacob agreed, his tone cordial but not overly warm. "A significant addition to American literary history, presented with the care it deserves. I understand there may be other projects in Legacy's holdings that could benefit from Sarah's expertise," Andrew added, a statement that confirmed he had at least overheard my conversation with the archives director. "If similar collaborations arise in the future, I hope Artemis will be open to them." I studied him, trying to discern his motivations behind this suggestion of continued professional connection. Was this simply good business sense, acknowledging a successful partnership that could be replicated? Or was there still some personal agenda at work, some desire to maintain a link, however tenuous, to a past he had lost? "We're always open to projects with literary merit and cultural significance," I replied diplomatically. "Each opportunity would be evaluated on its specific circumstances." Andrew nodded, accepting this non-committal response. "Of course. Well, congratulations again on a remarkable achievement. Your introduction to the novel is truly outstanding work, Sarah." After he had moved away to speak with other departing guests, Jacob leaned close to my ear. "You know, for all his faults, he does recognize quality when he sees it. He always did, even back when you were together. The difference is, now he can acknowledge it without feeling threatened by it." It was an insightful observation. Perhaps the most significant change in Andrew was not that he suddenly recognized my abilities, but that he could now celebrate them without experiencing them as a diminishment of his own status. Growth happens, I suppose, I murmured, even for Andrew Caldwell. Speaking of growth, Jacob said as we collected our coats, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Something about our future. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. That sounds serious. He smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression. It is, but in a good way. Can we talk about it at home after all this excitement? I nodded, curious but willing to wait for a more private moment. We made our final goodbyes and stepped out into the cool New York evening, where Jacob hailed a taxi to take us back to Brooklyn. In our living room, jackets discarded and shoes kicked off, Jacob poured us each a glass of wine before joining me on the sofa. His expression was both excited and slightly apprehensive, reminding me of the night he had proposed. So, I prompted, what's this serious discussion about our future? Jacob took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said a few months ago, about being ready to consider starting a family now that the Artemis Educational Division is established. About how working on the Westfield project reminded you of the importance of legacy, of passing on what matters to future generations. My heart quickened. We had indeed had this conversation, spurred by my reflections on Westfield's posthumous impact through her writing. I remember. I've been doing some research, Jacob continued, setting down his wine glass and taking my hands in his. And I found a brownstone for sale just 3 blocks from here. 4 bedrooms, a garden big enough for a swing set, walking distance to an excellent elementary school. I stared at him, processing what he was suggesting. You want us to buy a bigger home? For a family? He nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. I do. I want us to create that future we've talked about. Children, a home filled with books and love and laughter. I want to build that legacy with you, Sarah. Tears pricked at my eyes, not just at the picture he was painting, but at the stark contrast it presented to my past. Andrew had never discussed children except in abstract, theoretical terms. Our future together had been centered around career advancement and industry status, not family or community. When can we see this brownstone? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Jacob's face lit up with relief and joy. Tomorrow, if you want. I've already arranged a viewing with the realtor. I moved closer to him on the sofa, resting my head on his shoulder. I want that future too, you know. More than I realized until this moment. I know, he said softly, wrapping his arm around me. I've seen how you've been looking at families in the park lately, how you linger when we pass the children's section in bookstores. You're ready for this next chapter. We both are. As we sat there, dreaming aloud about the home and family we would build together, I felt the final pieces of my past with Andrew settling into perspective. What had once seemed like heartbreak and failure now revealed itself as necessary redirection, guiding me toward the life I was meant to live, a life of genuine partnership, mutual respect, and shared dreams. The next day, we visited the brownstone Jacob had found. It was everything he had described, spacious, filled with natural light, with original architectural details and modern updates where they mattered most. The garden was a private oasis in the midst of the city, with enough space for children to play and adults to entertain. The neighborhood was vibrant and family-friendly, with parks and schools within easy walking distance. We made an offer that afternoon. 3 weeks later, it was accepted. As we prepared to move from our current home to this larger space, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 5 years ago, I had walked out of the apartment I shared with Andrew, heartbroken and uncertain, but determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. I had advanced my career, found love with a man who truly saw and valued me, and now stood on the threshold of a new chapter, one that would include not just professional achievement, but family and community as well. On the day we closed on the new house, Jacob surprised me with a small wrapped box. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with my name embossed on the cover. "What's this for?" I asked, running my fingers over the smooth leather. "For the next chapter of your story," he replied simply. "The one where Sarah Evans builds a home, a family, and continues to change the literary world while doing it." I looked up at him. This man who had never once asked me to choose between my professional ambitions and personal fulfillment, who had never seen my success as a threat to his own, who had shown me what true partnership actually meant. "Our story," I corrected gently, taking his hand. Later that evening, as Jacob coordinated with the movers about our upcoming transition, I found myself alone in our soon-to-be former living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the accumulation of our life together thus far. On impulse, I opened the new journal Jacob had given me and began to write. 5 years ago, Andrew Caldwell told me I would never find love again. He said no one would ever want me the way he had, that no one would ever make me feel the way he made me feel. At the time, those words devastated me. Now I understand they were the greatest gift he ever gave me, because he was absolutely right, just not in the way he intended. No one has ever wanted me the way Andrew did, with conditions and constraints, with subtle undermining and constant comparison. No one has ever made me feel the way Andrew made me feel, alternately elevated and diminished, valued and dismissed, seen and overlooked. Instead, I found something infinitely better. A love based on mutual respect and genuine admiration, a partnership where success is celebrated rather than compared, a relationship where I am valued for exactly who I am rather than for how I reflect on someone else. In 3 months, Jacob and I will move into our new home, a space designed for the family we plan to build together. In 6 months, my expanded critical edition of Eleanor Westfield's complete works, including The Invisible Thread, will be published to what all indicators suggest will be significant acclaim. In a year, if all goes according to plan, I may be holding our first child in my arms. This is the life Andrew Caldwell said I would never have, a life of love, fulfillment, and achievement on my own terms. A life where personal happiness and professional success exist in harmony rather than competition. A life where I am fully seen, fully valued, and fully loved. I didn't marry Jacob Evans to spite Andrew Caldwell. I married him because in Jacob, I found what I never had with Andrew, a true partner who celebrates my light rather than dimming it to make his own shine brighter. But there is a certain poetry in the fact that Jacob and Andrew were once rivals, that the man who truly values me is the same man Andrew spent decades trying to outdo professionally. There is a symmetry to the reality that in losing me, Andrew lost not just a supportive partner, but the opportunity to understand what real partnership actually means. The sweetest revenge isn't manufacturing hurt for someone who once hurt you. It's building a life so full and joyful that their attempt to diminish you becomes laughable in retrospect. It's recognizing that their cruelty was never about your worth, but about their own insecurities. It's finding happiness so complete that you can look back on their predictions of your future misery with genuine pity for how wrong they were. He said I'd never find love again. I married his worst enemy. But the real story isn't about either of those men. It's about me, Sarah Evans, and the life I built after I stopped allowing someone else's limitations to define my possibilities. I closed the journal, running my hand over the cover. This was indeed the beginning of a new chapter, one written entirely in my own voice, shaped by my own choices, leading to a future limited only by my own imagination and courage. Jacob appeared in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the sight of me sitting among our half-packed life. "Ready for this next adventure?" he asked. I smiled, setting aside the journal and rising to join him. "More than ready," I assured him. "I've been preparing for it longer than I knew." As we stood together in the threshold between our past and future, I felt a profound sense of peace. Andrew Caldwell's prediction about my future had proven so spectacularly wrong that it had transformed from painful memory to ironic footnote in the story of my life. I hadn't just found love again. I had found a deeper, truer love than I had ever known was possible. I hadn't just survived the end of what I once thought was my future. I had thrived in ways I couldn't have imagined when I walked away from Andrew's diminishing vision of who I could be. The revenge in the end wasn't marrying Jacob. It was becoming Sarah Evans in full, editor, partner, future mother, woman who knew her worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect and love she deserved. And that was a revenge sweeter than anything I could have deliberately designed, a life lived well on my own terms, proving that the best response to someone who tries to limit you is to expand beyond anything they could have imagined possible.